Kapla, Honourable Warriors of the Empire, and welcome to this tutorial on readying your ships for battle. These 1 to 4000 scale ships were 3D printed for me by a dear friend, and will be my first Klingon ships for my Star Trek collection. The models were first cleaned up, attached to flight stands, and primed with a grey spray primer. The base coat can be applied just fine with a brush, but I decided to try breaking out the airbrush for this step, as it's a tool I'm trying to get more practice with. The birds of prey were given a base coat of Vallejo's pale green, mixed with a little yellow, while the Ingas were painted in Vallejo's dark grey. For the 22nd century ships, the Raptor and early birds of prey were base coated with Vallejo's light green, and the D5s were done in interior green-grey. We're going to start with the birds of prey first. Klingons don't place as much emphasis on the exterior cleanliness of their vessel as the Federation does, and their ships are a lot more likely to suffer damage and lose panels during combat. To show that, we're going to paint a few panels in different shades of green to break up the uniformity of the base coat. Using a fine tipped brush, we're going to use Vallejo's light green for the darker panels and interior green-grey for the lighter panels. Some of these will follow the feather pattern on the wings, but we'll also paint a few rectangles and squares at other places along the hull as well. Try not to make your panels too evenly distributed. A bit of asymmetry in the old cluster with several replaced panels will help tell that this was done out of necessity and isn't an intentional pattern. We'll paint the radiator baffles in a very dark grey, in this case Citadel's Corvus black. Then the pipe around the bow is painted in an orange-brown colour. We're also going to paint one of them with the iconic red feather pattern, there to show the vessel's allegiance to the Romulan Star Empire. Romulan? But I thought these were Klingon vessels, I hear you cry. And indeed they are, but originally the design was intended to be a Romulan one. The early scripts for Star Trek III called for a Romulan bird of prey, so the model makers gave it a feather pattern to tie it to the original Romulan bird of prey from Balance of Terror. By the time the script was changed, it was too late to redo the model, so it was explained as being a design that the Klingons had bought from the Romulans. After all, we know the Klingons had sold some designs to the Romulans, so why shouldn't it happen the other way around as well? But then Star Trek VI showed us a Inga with red feather patterns as well, and Enterprise gave us a Klingon design lineage for the bird of prey by showing earlier versions of it. So, as with much of Star Trek lore, there's an element of interpretation one can make about it. For my personal interpretation, I imagine the red as being symbolic of the ship having been blooded in a major battle. Stories and history play a significant role in Klingon society, and I imagine this would extend to their vessels as well. Anyway, now that tangent's over with, we can make a start on painting the windows. We'll want to do a mix of rooms with lights on and off, to give the impression of life happening within the ships. Black is used for the lightless windows, while a pale yellow is used for those that are lit up. Make sure to brace your elbows and wrists as well if possible. This will help steady your hands and improve your control over the brush. Now's the time to clean up any details that need it, using the original green we painted the hull. Then we can do an all-over oil wash using black with a little brown mixed in. We're not going to try and paint any individual streaks at this scale, but a rough all-over wash will help pick out the details and give the impression of dirt and grime in the recesses. If there are any areas where we want to dial back the wash, we can easily wipe it off with a little thinner. Now that's starting to look like a Klingon warship. The final details we want to do now are to re-establish any windows that were dulled by the wash, and then do a quick version of object source lighting for the impulse engines. To do this, we're going to paint the source of the light in the brightest and smoothest white we can get a hold of. Once we've painted that into the engineering source and touched up the jagged edges again, we'll do a quick glaze of red over the whole area. Draw your brush towards and over the light source so that more paint is deposited where it be brightest, using a clean brush to soak up any excess afterwards. Then do the same for the yellow band in the middle, and that's it. The bases were painted with black and everything was sealed with a matte varnish. That's our birds of prey done. The Kata Ingas are up next. There are a few different canonical colour schemes for these, but in this case we're going with the 24th century colour scheme, representing the old and venerable vessels still in service around the time of the Dominion War. We're going to start by picking out some of the panels with Vallejo's pale green. Once the pale green panels have been done, we're going to make a mix of grey and interior green-grey for the middle panels and a few details along the neck and bridge module. A stripe along the neck is painted with dark grey, before Corvus black is used again for the radiator baffles, along with details along the leading edges of the hull and nacelles. A desaturated dark brown is used to paint the Y-shaped structure above the radiators. We're going to use a metallic paint to pick out the front nacelle details in a cool copper hue. I normally tend to avoid using metallics on models of this size, as the flakes don't always look right at this tiny scale, but I'm fairly happy with how these ones have turned out. For the remaining panels, we're going to use a mix of Citadel's Corn Red and Wordbearer's Red, desaturated a little with some grey. I imagine these to be old and storied vessels that have proved their mettle in countless battles over the years. For that reason, they're both going to get lots of red panelling over their hulls and bridge modules, though in slightly different patterns to give them some individuality. The last step before the oil wash is to paint some tiny lights on the hull. Using a pale yellow, we'll paint a few dots and stripes into the two recesses along the bridge module, as well as a few along the bow-facing portions of the main hull. Once we've cleaned up any overspill, we can move on to the wash. This is done again with a mix of black and brown oil paints, though with a little more brown in it this time than we used with the Bird of Prey. Thin the mix down to a wash with thinners and apply it liberally all over the vessel. You can use a dry brush to soak up any areas where it pulls too heavily, or to blend or remove it from areas where you want the paintwork to show through more. After the wash, we're going to re-establish our windows, then do a quick bit of object saw slicing on the engines at the back. I did consider doing some OSL on the radiators, but decided against it for two reasons. Firstly, this is quite a dark paint scheme overall, and I didn't want bright radiator panels to draw the eye away and make it harder to notice the tiny windows. Secondly, I imagine the radiator panels will glow when the reactors are being pushed hard, and I didn't want the vessels to look like they were struggling. Yes, they're old hulls, but internally they've received numerous upgrades and modernisations over the years, and their crews are experts in their respective ships. In short, I wanted to give the impression that these ships didn't have to exert themselves to destroy you. Finally, we can paint the base black, and give the ships a final spray varnish to protect them. Now we're on to the 22nd century vessels. Enterprise gave us a surprising variety of Klingon designs, though they all featured relatively simple colour schemes, at least in terms of what we can achieve at this scale. For that reason, we're actually going to go straight onto the oil wash and object source lighting. The oil wash for all of them is just black with a little brown mixed in, applied liberally over the whole model. In some places I went back and added a little more paint to make sure the details popped, and any excess was removed using either a dry brush or some thinner. We'll start the light sources the same way we did previously, with a bright white. The yellow impulse engines were then glazed with Citadel's flash kits yellow, while Mephiston red was used for the red ones. The somraw class raptor has uniquely blue glowing sections at the stern. To paint these, I used a glaze of temple guard blue. For the glowing heat sinks, mix Mephiston red with Fire Dragon Bright for a nice orangey glow. The details on these are honestly astounding, and I can't sing praises enough for the friend who printed them for me. My collection of files has been built up over almost a decade, with many of the designs actually being intended for things like fan animations rather than 3D printing. I don't own a 3D printer myself, but I know enough about the process to realise that there are probably all sorts of problems and challenges that needed to be figured out for these to print at all, let alone with this level of accuracy. So thank you Toby, for these and for everything else you've printed for me over the years. With those steps done, we can paint the bases and seal the minis with a coat of varnish. Then it's time for the beauty shots. These were really fun miniatures to paint. It was an absolute delight painting all of the tiny details, and they're small enough that it didn't take too long to paint any one individual ship. I'd love to try painting one of the larger scale kits at some point, but I want to get it with the photo etch brass upgrade sets, and the combination can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. Until then though, thank you for watching my video, I hope you've enjoyed it. I've been Mark, and I hope you have a wonderful day.